It was supposed to be routine, just a set of subpoenas tied to a lawsuit, but what dropped next detonated across Hollywood and YouTube like a bomb, because these weren't just any subpoenas, they pointed fingers directly at Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, and what followed was a flood of creators, breaking silence, dumping receipts, and revealing a coordinated smear operation that went deeper than anyone imagined. And now the narrative is flipped, the court is watching, and the truth is crawling out from the shadows, one subpoena at a time. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds thought they could stay above it all, let the glitz, the charm, the perfect Hollywood facade would shield them forever, but that illusion shattered the moment creators started getting subpoenaed, and what followed was not just pushback, it was a digital firestorm that even their elite legal team couldn't predict, because what began as a quiet legal maneuver quickly turned into a full-blown exposure campaign, with independent creators turning the tables, armed with receipts, testimonies, leaked emails, and relentless timelines of harassment tactics. And it started when the first wave of subpoenas landed in inboxes, not through lawyers but through content moderation backdoors, flagged accounts, sudden bans, unusual copyright strikes, all pointing to the same coordinated wave. And behind the veil sat law firms and PR agencies, and deep inside that machinery were names like Lively and Reynolds embedded in subject lines CCD on strategy memos, and at the center was a growing list of creators who refused to be silenced. One of them, an investigative commentator known online only as Ghostmick, uploaded a viral thread mapping out the timeline with chilling accuracy: every takedown email, every flagged video, every vague copyright claim, all matching patterns with pinpoint precision. And then came the moment that cracked the narrative wide open: an anonymous drop, a whistleblower from a boutique digital firm who shared a trove of documents showing internal communications, describing creators as potential threats, liabilities, enemies of the narrative, and in one disturbing line, a strategy doc read neutralized before engagement, using quote preemptive character questioning and blacklisted tags. And suddenly creators across platforms realized they weren't imagining it, they were targeted, and some had even been digitally profiled by private AI tools designed to calculate quote risk-to-image ratios, with creators assigned color-coded threat levels. Red meant remove entirely, and yes, multiple creators were in the red, including some with less than 10K followers. And when one subpoena creator tried to explain this in court, they were interrupted by a defense lawyer stating this is irrelevant to the defamation case, but the judge disagreed, demanding to see the whistleblower documents. And then in open court, those pages were read aloud, revealing names, dates, strategy sessions, one of which mentioned a secret project named Clearglass, rumored to be the covert defamation pipeline used to flag influencers, spread anonymous smears, and execute character destabilization campaigns. And yes, Ryan Reynolds' name appeared not once but 4 times, linked in emails described as approving PR outreach, reviewing story drafts, and more chillingly approving crisis escalation budgets for influencers who quote won't play along. And while the defense scrambled, the creators doubled down. One by one they started going public, some in videos, some in threads, some in live streams, narrating their harassment in ways that stripped the glamour from the lawsuit, showing the public what it felt like to be shadow banned over a meme, to lose sponsors over a single comment, to have family members stalked online over a commentary video. And each story further tore the mask from the polished public image of 2 of Hollywood's most beloved faces. And as the court date loomed, the subpoenas backfired, not only failing to silence critics but activating a coalition of creators, lawyers, digital rights groups, and investigative reporters. And now with mainstream media finally catching on, hashtags like #Smeargate and #subpoenaed by celebs trended globally, and still new receipts emerged, including a deleted audio file recovered by a cybersecurity researcher that featured a strategist saying, "Blake signed off, or clear to proceed." And another line, "You'll like this one, Ryan laughed at the draft, he said. It's savage." And now there's no putting the genie back, because what started as subpoenas turned into an avalanche, and this is just the beginning. The second wave hit harder than anyone expected, because now creators weren't just responding. They were investigating, digging, combing through archives, metadata, old sponsor deals, timestamps, screen recordings, and what they found obliterated any last doubt that this was coincidence. It was not, and at the core of the evidence, a recurring label buried deep in files labeled as damage funnel protocol, a term that came up again and again across different agencies, different platforms, sometimes abbreviated DFP. And in one leaked briefing presentation, the term was defined as digital threat isolation for high-profile client image protection, and that phrase alone sent tremors through the courtroom because it proved the existence of a playbook, a blueprint not just for responding to criticism but for crushing it. And that playbook outlined tactics that included suppression of search results, coordinated copyright challenges, third-party harassment referrals, and something that made the judge lean forward: influencer suppression tracking sheets, spreadsheets that ranked creators by influence, virality, risk, and opinion sway, and there were codes next to their names: NS for neutralize silently, FF for flood and flip, and a third code, DBR for destroy by reputation, and next to one mid-sized creator's name all three codes were marked red. And then came the most damning document yet, a timeline labeled full cycle smear with dates, contacts, influencer targets, press outreach, and fund allocations, and who was CCD Blake's agency, Ryan's brand manager, and the same law firm issuing subpoenas. Now the courtroom turned colder because this wasn't theory anymore, it was evidence, and even members of the public gallery shifted in their seats, some visibly shaken, and outside social media was already erupting with creators comparing notes matching timestamps of their takedowns with those on the smear timeline, and the matches were precise down to the hour. And then one YouTuber came forward with a personal story. They had been offered a quiet NDA payout after a viral tweet mocking a red carpet moment involving Ryan was suddenly followed by account suspension, shadow bans, and an anonymous email suggesting they crossed an invisible line, and now the email was submitted into court evidence with a digital fingerprint that traced back to a third-party firm tied to the Reynolds PR team, and when pressed under oath, the firm's former employee confessed the project had multiple celebrity clients but acknowledged that in this case, quote, "we were instructed to focus specifically on creators, criticizing the image of the couple, and the instruction came from the top, and the top meant the clients, and that meant Ryan and Blake." And still the defense argued plausible deniability, but that argument cracked when an internal memo was presented showing email forwards from Blake's personal assistant, containing links to creator videos circled with red question marks and handwritten notes like liability, too loud, problem, and one chilling comment in her handwriting reading, "What's the quietest way to mute this without triggering blowback?" And then another receipt surfaced, an invoice billed as reputation neutralization package phase 2 paid by a shell company tied directly to Ryan's tequila brand, and the payment note read emergency pushback post Ghostmic, and the date matched the viral Ghostmic thread that first exposed the operation. Now even journalists covering the case were stunned, because it wasn't just legal strategy, it was tactical. And it wasn't just public relations, it was quiet coercion, and this wasn't happening in 2005. This was modern Hollywood, this was algorithmic warfare, using courts, media, and coordinated suppression to silence criticism and maintain power. And the judge called for recess not because of scheduling but to review the growing pile of evidence in chambers, and while the judge stepped away, creators outside flooded TikTok with court recaps, document readings, dramatic reenactments, even AI recreations of the memos, all going viral and all pointing to the same horrifying truth: this wasn't a few bad decisions, this was a system run like a military operation targeting anyone who dared break the fantasy. And suddenly the fans weren't laughing, the media wasn't laughing, and sponsors started to pull inquiries, because now subpoenas weren't silencing, they were exposing. And every time the couple's legal team tried to argue defamation, the evidence screamed retaliation. And by the end of the day, one final piece of evidence surfaced: a private Discord chat leaked by another whistleblower from a digital moderation firm showing messages bragging about, quote, taking down a critic with a fake copyright claim. And when asked who approved it, the reply read BR initials, "That's all I can say," and everyone knew what that meant now. This wasn't speculation, it was war. And part 3 is where escalates beyond recovery, because what's coming next will shake even the most loyal fans to their core. As the third day unfolded, it became clear no spin, no statement, no celebrity charm could rescue what was collapsing in real time. Because now subpoenas weren't just uncovering emails or invoices, they were unlocking an entire ecosystem of creator suppression. And what was revealed in part 3 wasn't just shocking, it was systematic, because the whistleblowers kept coming, some anonymous, some brave enough to speak on record, and one after another they confirmed the same thing: that this wasn't a one-off, it wasn't emotional overreaction or petty reputation management, it was doctrine, cold, rehearsed, efficient. And one by one, creators across platforms began to report nearly identical experiences: strangely timed strikes, obscure community guideline violations, shadowy threats, emails from non-existent legal reps, and even platform bans that were later quietly reversed with no explanation. And one creator who had spoken out about the couple's alleged influence peddling was banned on Instagram, days after receiving a brand partnership, and within the files, now presented to court, an internal screenshot from a PR firm noted that particular creator was, quote, tagged for intervention, and that term intervention showed up again across different files, flagged, and in another document, chillingly labeled influence shaping, there were notes on how to adjust online sentiment, using burner accounts, press leaks, and algorithm rigging, with detailed instructions on how to steer conversation away from the scandal and toward controlled distractions. And then came the influencer dossiers, hundreds of them categorized by threat level and engagement value, red, amber, green, with notes like hyperreactive, triggerable, lean, left, history of outrage, potential for viral pushback, and in some of these dossiers creators were marked with preferred silencing method, and under one creator's name it read, copyright flood plus reputation fracture, and underneath the instructions for targeting the creator sponsor deals with coordinated backlash campaigns. And in court, when asked who funded the system, a financial auditor testified under oath that the payments originated from layered shell companies ultimately funded by two brand subsidiaries under Reynolds and One Trust, linked to Blake's lifestyle empire. And the gallery gasped because it wasn't just a scandal, it was a labyrinth, a maze built to shield the powerful, while punishing dissent, and at the center were polished smiles, red carpet charm, and carefully crafted relatability, and that was what made it burn more, the dissonance between the brand and the behavior and even media outlets previously loyal to the couple began to pivot, with headlines like Hollywood's darkest secret influencer suppression empire or Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' weaponized PR machine exposed. And suddenly the case was no longer about isolated defamation suits, it was about systemic abuse of legal frameworks, corporate funds, and digital platforms to hunt, silence, and erase. And what came next ensured there would be no easy exit, because one former intern turned key witness handed over what he described as the binder, the holy grail, a black folder he claimed was kept in the PR firm's vault, labeled with 3 words, creator neutralization plan, and inside pages and pages of targets, posts, screenshots, drafts of smear campaigns, mock legal threats, cease. And as this templates predated to appear urgent, and on several pages initials BL and RR appeared next to approval stamps, and the courtroom again fell still, and the judge's face changed stern. Unblinking, the defense attempted to suppress the binder, citing privacy violations, but the judge ruled it admissible, citing overwhelming public interest and legal relevance. And then came the final bombshell, a part 3, an audio recording from an internal strategy call where a voice widely believed to be Blake's could be heard saying, "I don't want noise, I want control. If they can't be silenced, make them irrelevant." And when the prosecution asked the digital forensic expert to verify the recording, he replied, "We cross-referenced the voice sample with no public interviews, and the match is above 99%, and now the foundation was crumbling because that one sentence exposed intent, motive, orchestration all at once, and creators were no longer afraid. They were emboldened, some even calling for a class action lawsuit, others organizing a coalition to demand platform transparency. And as the court recessed, the whispers turned to roars. The public was no longer watching passively, they were demanding accountability. And the legal team for the couple issued a rushed statement, blaming rogue consultants, a misinterpreted strategy, a narrative hijack. But it fell flat because the evidence kept coming, the receipts kept dropping, and the rage kept growing, because people finally understood this wasn't about fame anymore, it was about power and who gets to speak and who gets silenced. And now, as part 4 looms, the world braces for the deeper fallout, because subpoenas opened a door that cannot be closed. And behind that door is everything they never wanted us to see. And now it was personal, because what unfolded in part 4 was not just a continuation, it was a detonation. Every illusion, every soft smile, every quirky joke, every carefully scripted interview shattered under the weight of what the subpoenas dragged into the light. And this time it wasn't just creators or consultants or shell payments, no, this time it was the platforms themselves dragged into the crosshairs as the court compelled testimony from insiders at 3 major tech companies, and what they revealed blew the lid off the entire ecosystem, because they confirmed that they had received flagged reports from third-party legal reps tied to Reynolds' legal group and Blake's management firm. But these flags were not ordinary. They were escalated through back channels and sometimes bypassed moderation queues entirely, and more disturbingly, they were pre-approved requests labeled under reputation protection. And That phrase became the centerpiece of a digital abuse scandal because behind it lay an entire informal system, a backdoor mechanism to silence users. Tasked with no record, no warning, and no way to appeal, and on the stand a former trust and safety employee from one of the largest platforms broke protocol to admit yes, some creators were targeted specifically after those requests came in, and when asked how they knew who to flag, the answer sent chills down every spine in the courtroom. We were given links to videos, names of creators, and even suggested violation language, and at the top of the request forms the initials BLRR appeared frequently, and that's when people lost it. Social media erupted again, and this time hashtags like #ProtectTheCreators and #ExposedBySubpoena trended globally, but the worst had yet to drop because the prosecution wasn't finished. They played a clip from a security camera feed obtained via subpoena, and in it two consultants from the PR firm can be seen in a private meeting room discussing creator strategy. One says, "So we have clearance from her to move forward," and the other responds, "Cool, so strike him first, then flood the search with counterpieces." And this clip wasn't just speculative. It came with a time-stamped email sent just hours later containing the same plan forwarded from a personal account linked to a manager in Reynolds' camp, and as that clip ended, the court heard gasps followed by the judge's words, "Heavy with consequence." This court recognizes a pattern out of miscommunication but of coordinated effort to manipulate digital narrative through extra-legal influence, and that quote was picked up by every outlet, every podcast, every live stream, and now the story wasn't just viral, it was historic. People called it a landmark, and influencer rights, others compared it to the unmasking of political operations, but the most damning blow came in the form of a single-page document uncovered in a second-tier firm that had been quietly managing quote recovery protocols, and that document showed contingency flows, not just for how to silence critics, but how to rebuild image if exposure occurred. And in that plan, there were drafted public apologies with blank name fields, placeholders for tiers and vulnerability content, strategy notes for comeback arcs, and even timed rebranding schedules, and at the bottom, a signature authorization marked complete, and next to it were the initials R&B written in matching ink, and it hit everyone like a freight train. This wasn't a cleanup plan, this was a war plan. PR as psychological warfare, law as narrative control, and digital space as territory to dominate. And when asked by the prosecution what the phrase quote image dominance meant, one former strategist responded, "It was about flooding the feed, making sure the first 10 results were us, making sure our version lived longer than theirs, and if necessary making sure they didn't speak again." And now the room didn't just feel shocked, it felt violated, because this wasn't about celebrity drama anymore. This was about using power to erase opposition at the speed of the internet, and the judge, visibly disturbed, demanded a recess calling for independent review of the evidence to assess potential obstruction and perjury. And as court broke, creators lined the steps of the courthouse, some holding signs, others streaming live, each telling their version of how they were gaslit, attacked, silenced, and finally seen. And from inside, the defense team looked rattled, cracks forming even among their own advisors, some who had quietly started scrubbing connections, while others debated jumping ship, and one anonymous source leaked that Blake's own inner circle was beginning to fracture, with top-level reps questioning whether the cost of protection was now greater than the fallout of truth. And at the center of it all were two names, Blake and Ryan, now facing not just legal threats, but cultural reckoning, because the internet was awake and angry. And the one thing even their power couldn't control was a story this big that now lived on every device, every feed, every scroll, every headline. And with part 5 approaching, everyone knew it would no longer be about who controlled the message, it would be about who survived it. And what started as whispers of suspicion grew into a thunderous reckoning, because the subpoenas didn't just peel back the surface, the polished veneer of celebrity and branding and influence, and beneath it they found a war room, not a PR team. They found weapons, not strategies. They found silence bought, paid for, orchestrated piece by piece, while real people, creators' voices, careers were crushed underfoot by a machine designed to erase them. And as the court prepared for its final sessions, the world outside no longer saw Blake and Ryan as untouchable, as charming, as cute. They saw them as powerful and dangerous too. Faces behind a digital empire of intimidation and denial. And what made it worse, what made it permanent, was the evidence, the signatures, the memos, the coordinated patterns that didn't lie, because unlike narratives, facts don't spin. And now fans were divided, some in denial, some in rage, and others realizing maybe fame built on fiction is still fiction, no matter how pretty the lie. And For the creators who endured the worst, who had been mocked, silenced, cancelled, forgotten, this wasn't just a trial, it was vindication. It was the first time someone said you were right, you were targeted, and now the world knows. And in that courtroom where every detail was documented, every abuse shown, every silence broken, the judge stood not just as an arbitrator of law, but as a witness to a system cracking open from the inside. And his final words echoed everywhere. This court will not protect the powerful at the cost of the truth, and that sentence became legend, etched into videos, headlines, tweets, and history, because no matter what happens next, no matter how the appeals go, how the brands spin, how the stars try to reinvent again, the internet remembers, and this time so does the law. And the truth once exposed can't be buried again.